It is astounding how this film has managed to both alienate fans of the original and anyone who would have been on board with what they're going for here. I'm not the biggest fan of Joker, but I was really excited about the prospect of Joker 2 because Warner Brothers let Todd Phillips spend $200 million to make a musical. And I get that a musical is a turn-off for a lot of people, but for me, that was the main selling point. Because so many sequels end up trying to do just more of the same thing. A musical is exactly the kind of shot of adrenaline that would really make doing another one of these kind of interesting. And the Joker is already such a theatrical character, so a musical ties in with that perfectly. And so even though I'd heard bad press about this film, I was really excited to see how all that money was going to be spent funding big, highly choreographed dance numbers with dozens of extras. This movie did not have big, highly choreographed dance numbers with dozens of extras. A lot of people are going to blame the financial failure of this film on the fact that it's a musical, and maybe that is part of the reason, but the fact that it is a terrible musical really doesn't help it. The songs do absolutely nothing to move the story forward and are filmed in the most static, boring way. I mean, they basically had a blank check to do whatever the hell they wanted with this film, so you'd think they'd really go for it, but this film stays so static and grounded. I had thought the prospect of a musical meant that Todd Phillips was inspired in some way, that he was fired up to make this film, but the movie makes you feel like he was forced to make it against his will. I really just couldn't believe how dull the musical segments were. But even if the movie had dropped the songs, I don't think that would have significantly improved the film other than making it shorter, because it's crazy to me how much of this fell flat. It picks up right after the finale of the first one, and it's essentially about Arthur going on trial for his crimes, but because the film is so concerned about looking back at the events of the first film, it feels a lot more like an extended epilogue rather than a proper sequel, and has a really obtuse way of going about it. See, if there's any part of the first film, it's in the way that it gets you to essentially root for the villain. You know he's doing terrible things, but you can't help but want to see how it plays out. There is a part of you that wanted to see him get revenge on Murray Franklin, and if audiences didn't, the movie wouldn't have made $1 billion. The problem is that a lot of people identified a little too hard with the Joker, and the film got criticised for it. And so Joker Foile A Deux makes a real point of relitigating the fact that Arthur is a bad person, and it's kind of scolding the audience for ever being on board with him in the first place. And I'm not totally against the idea of trying to go under the first one. I think the idea of making an audience uncomfortable with ever having enjoyed his actions in the first movie is a really interesting challenge. But the film makes Arthur super passive. He gets moved about place to place, and so much of the movie is just things happening to him. It's just weird when so much of what people liked about the first one is seeing a guy who's been beat down, who's ignored, who's passive in life, take action. But then this film puts him right back to the start again. And you can make the argument that that's the point of the movie, but it's just really boring to watch. Half the movie is a courtroom drama, and it never really sets up the stakes for it. There's physical stakes, you know what will happen if he loses, but there's really no emotional stakes, no reason to care. Which is strange, because the movie sets up a pretty big emotional center for the movie with Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn. And that relationship feels like the perfect place for this sequel to go. She's fantastic every time she's on screen, you completely buy her and Arthur together, and her performance feels so perfect for this world. But she's really in the movie a surprisingly little amount. It feels like such an own goal to me. You've got this massive star playing this iconic character, she's fantastic in it, and then they barely utilize her. I mean, she's so good, I kind of wish the movie had been told from her perspective. And it might have been a bit easier for the film itself to turn on Arthur if we weren't so embedded in his point of view. Because, again, it's shocking to me how much this film antagonizes the audience. There's so little to latch onto, and at a certain point it became really unclear where this film was heading. And sometimes that can be a really good thing in a movie. It's exciting to not know where things will end up, but this baffled me. The last 10 minutes of this movie took a film that I really wasn't enjoying very much and then just dives into the ground. I really don't know what feeling I was supposed to be left with here. I don't think the first movie was particularly deep, but I think there's interesting things you can say about it. This movie is so insistent on making sure that you know he's a bad guy that it sort of makes you feel like you've wasted your time for ever caring in the first place. And so, having now seen the film, I'm not surprised it's bombing, because it does not care about the audience at all, and audiences don't seem to care about it. I'm honestly half convinced that this film is a money laundering scheme. Like, I do not understand where the budget went. There are very few characters, there are very few locations. It really doesn't feel that much bigger than the first one. Not 4 times the budget level, at least, anyway. I guess the most interesting thing about this film is the fact that they had complete creative freedom on it. Apparently there were no notes given, they did no test screenings. This was exactly the film that Todd Phillips wanted to make. And it was supposed to be one of the biggest movies of the year. I mean, the first one at the time was the highest grossing R-rated film ever. And now this might be one of the biggest flops of the year. And it is a shame because there is still so much talent on screen here. I mean, the sets do look fantastic. Joaquin Phoenix reminding everyone why he won the Oscar. Lady Gaga is fantastic. It looks absolutely beautiful. But the story is just absolutely baffling, and unfortunately it commits the biggest sin that I think a movie can make, and that's just being boring. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you thought in the comments. It seems like people seem to dislike this movie in all sorts of different ways, and if you want to make sure that you don't miss anything coming up on the channel, make sure to subscribe.